In its ideal form, restorative justice is a set of principles and practices that allow humanizing the dehumanized. In other words, it allows people to engage and participate, finding a meaning and acting with the world, transforming the world. It is a possibility of justice that allows you to learn and be educated about the other, his history, her or her social construct. It is about learning the other. It's about an educational process, as Paulo Freire would put it. So it's a set of principles and practices. There are 5 principles: values, relationships, responsibility, addressing harm, and strengthening community. The assumption for restorative justice is that we interact socially with one another based on our values, not necessarily the law. We don't all know the laws of our lands, but we do have a sense of value that come with us from our families, our religion, and whatnot. So we tend to focus more on those values than the law when we interact socially with one another. The second principle is related to relationships. Relationships are more valuable. Human relationships, the relationships we have with nature, are more valuable than any subscribed norm that is written and used to decide one's life and future. The idea of relationship in restorative justice is that I am not Joao, I am Joao plus my relationships. So I am Joao, son of Rose, son of Joseph, brother of Adrian, friend of Claudia. I am Joao plus my relationships. And if something happens to me, that will have consequently an effect on my relationships. So if you lock up a young person, that will have a consequence in that young person's life, but also to his or her relationships. Relationships are vital to understanding restorative justice. It's about responsibility, and this is something that needs to be corrected in a lot of what's being said about restorative justice. Restorative justice does not focus on individual responsibility. It's not that one individual person that needs to take responsibility for his or her behavior. It is about above the individual, or I should say not only, it's above that individual responsibility, there is a sense of collective responsibility. How has the collective neglected that youth? How has it been omissive to that youth? We need to have a dialogue around that. It's about addressing harm. It's about having dialogues around shame and trauma, the trauma that a youth goes through, and to get to the point of that harm that he or she committed. Has he or she been a victim herself of neglect and whatnot? Sexual assault sometimes and things like that. So we need to talk about the shame and the trauma, and that is in the addressing the harm principle. And lastly, we need to strengthen community, and community as relationships, as acknowledgement of my multidimensionality. A youth is not just that behavior that he or she was involved in. That youth is a complex being. Social being, a political being, an economic being, a spiritual being, an emotional being. We need to see ourselves as a complexity of things, not only just one behavior. So restorative justice in those principles allows all of that good stuff to happen. The literature talks about 4 main practices of restorative justice: victim offender mediation, family group conferencing, peacemaking circle, and also the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. 2 out of those 4 are based on indigenous practices coming from New Zealand and Canada. So in a nutshell, that's a restorative justice, which encompasses principles and practices. Now, restorative justice in nature should be addressing issues of social and distributive injustice. It needs to address issues of poverty. It needs to address issues of race. It needs to address issues of gender inequality. It needs to address issues of sexual orientation that in many countries around the world is something that we don't talk about, given the cultures of different parts of the world. But it gives us the opportunity not to only restore that dignity and that capacity to engage in dialogue and participate and come to a decision, but it also allows what we call transformational justice, the possibility of transforming an organization, a neighborhood, a city, a country. So those elements, or restorative justice has, in essence, it has that possibility. So restorative justice, above all, is a possibility for transformation, or at least it should be. When an individual and his or her relationships take ownership and acknowledge what has happened, why it has happened, what is going on that led to the conflict, it allows some sort of conscious, or what Paulo Freire would say, conscientização, this reasoning. It's part of we become not anymore behavioral stimulus response beings, but we become human beings that are stimulated, or not stimulated, but we follow our reason more than our behavior. And so at that moment, it becomes a moment of transformation, when you become aware of what you did, the consequences, the responsibility you have towards the other, and how that has affected the other person's life and your life and the people around you. It is truly transformational in that sense. In a macro level, that's in a micro level, but in a macro level, for example, in Chicago right now, we're utilizing restorative justice to address issues of racism. A lot of the kids that go through the justice system are Black and they're poor. And restorative justice allows us to, or it should at least allow us to address those issues of social injustices, historical injustices, and so forth. But this has happened. This is one example. There are many examples out there that can serve as antidotes of the transformational power that restorative justice has. Restorative justice should not be imposed, I don't think. And some of the literature talks about that we shouldn't impose restorative justice on anyone. It should be a volunteer process. I believe that education towards restorative justice plays a role in putting forward this possibility of justice for the future generations. Until now, we've been great at innovating in so many areas of our lives, but in the social world and the social sciences, we've done very little. And I think restorative justice has that potential. But again, it's a possibility. I don't want to say that restorative justice is the magic potion of solving questions of justice. If the premise for us is that justice is something that we need to build, and we need to build on an everyday basis, that is not something that we go and get at the court if that's something that we construct as human beings on an everyday basis, then it makes it easier for us to understand restorative justice in its practices and its principles. No magic, no going to a court, no going anywhere to get it or to buy it or to pay somebody to pursue it for you. It's something that you as a citizen need to pursue on an everyday basis. And I think restorative justice allows that to happen.